It's got a Wi-Fi connection in it, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I know. It's like a smart TV.
New technology.
Smart TV, correct?
Well,
I have a monitor in my office that I do the AirPlay to. I just tried it.
that is a smart TV because one day I was trying, like a census meeting or something, we were trying to connect, and all of a sudden, like some talk show was playing, some daytime talk show. I'm like, don't know how
Is
I
it a
did
Samsung?
that.
Yes.
It's a Samsung, yeah. So Samsung has like a whole suite of channels at the bottom of it that they allow that's on there. That we watch on, I mean, like stupid Baywatch channel or
Then you have to have all the plugins because it's all built in.
yeah, it's on the list. This old house now. I think I probably watch it.
She makes me pay for food and lights to eat just so I can watch Bravo and E and all my channels.
She doesn't watch those that good. You don't watch Bravo and E and all that stuff.
Just big reality TV.
Trash TV.
Is there a
Good
remote
one.
install?
Yeah.
Dave,
I think all we have to
He
do
said one
is
of
hit
those
OK and it should allow it to go.
think so. I mean, unless he, you know, one was up for sale.
So here it's
And
right
I keep
here.
hearing that, you know, I put both up for sale. And maybe somebody gave him an offer to pay reviews, but
Yeah.
I think, I'm not sure which house they live in. They've done a beautiful job. Yeah, they did. Restoring their
No,
swim
we
lane.
don't. Back here anymore. When we remodeled, it disappeared.
Hey, it's 9 o'clock.
I know, I'm working on technology right now.
We've got a glitch.
Good morning, I have 9 o'clock. We'll call the meeting to order. If we could have roll call, please.
Sure, Mr. Smith,
Here.
Mr. Slayton,
Here,
Mr. Blinn,
Here.
Mr. McNeese,
Here.
and Mr. Parsley informed me that he would not be able to attend today.
Sorry, Mark, I thought you were there. Adoption of the agenda, please.
Make a motion, we adopt the agenda as presented.
I'll second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further additions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same. Motion carries. Financial report. Okay. How are you, Gary?
Good, how are you guys?
Good.
That's it.
I can. Oh, you have copies of it as well?
Yeah, we
Okay,
have it,
perfect. I was going to ask if you guys would like me to cover the financial update while I'm here. I'd be happy to do so.
I think we should.
Yeah,
that's a
that sounds
good
good to me. So I've got that pulled up here at the very top of the screen. So as you guys know, we do a lot of things for the Redevelopment Commission. One of which is update this on a monthly basis, and this also takes care of all your reporting requirements, your annual reporting requirements. So page 3 there, this is part of your April reporting requirement. We go ahead and just update that annually. So it's got all your members and the terms, any outstanding employee information, local council, and then any overlapping units that would be impacted by the Redevelopment Commission. We'll talk about that more here in just a minute, that overlapping units section. Perhaps the most important part of page 3 is where we're tracking the Tif expirations. So we have all the allocation area, declaratory resolutions. There on page 3. You can see the Hart Street allocation area, all the dates of the declaratory resolutions when they were adopted, what the base assessment date is, and then what the Tif expiration is. So as you guys know, depending on when the declaratory resolution was signed for your allocation areas, that kicks off a clock. Depending on what year they were signed, there's different rules they fall under. So page 3 tracks those declaratory dates and then what the Tif expiration date is projected to be.
Hey, Gary,
Yes,
on
sir.
those projection dates of the TIF expiration, is there, do we have a number assigned to each little section? There's 3 sections. What percentage of income comes into the TIF based on those particular sections?
I have that information. Your plan doesn't have it, but I have that information. If you'd like, we can easily put that in your plan.
We've
So-
seen that. I think we've seen it.
You
before.
probably have. I think, let me see if I can get this pulled up here. If you'd like to see it, I can pull it up.
And I guess one of those other questions, I know we're talking about 2026, which seems a long way away, but it's not. just even the revenue that would flow back into the various entities throughout, not only Vincennes or Knox County, what that percentage is. I understand that it's not a one-for-one, and what it does, based on that, I think at some point, those different entities would like to see what their projected funds could be in 2026.
Well, and that's exactly kind of what the TIF impact presentation will do, which we're covering today. Would be, hypothetically, if that went away, I can pull this up. I don't know if you guys can see this or not. But this is your TIF Fund 301. So we're actually tracking all your different allocation areas right here. So this is outside the print range on the Excel file, so you don't see this piece, but this is how we calculate the revenue. So as you can see, the pay 2026 expiration component makes up $44.5 million total. The 2030 component's $2 million, and then the 2039 is almost $16 million. So a large percentage, obviously well over half of, 70+%. Well, it'd be whatever 44 divided by 62 is, would be, so 2/3, would be expiring in 2026. So. But if you guys would like to see that, we can easily unhide that piece and just add that to the plan. That would not take any time at all. It's
I don't think it's a bad thing to have that.
Yep, I'll make that note to add that.
It's kind of nice to have extra information.
Let's see. Okay, so that's the page 3. Moving on to page 4, these are all your claims. This is updated again through November. So all the claims we pop in monthly, as you guys know, and that goes in towards feeding the entire report. So that's just all of our claims you'll be approving later today. Page 5, really important page. Obviously, this calculates your cash flow by month. As you guys know, you receive your 2 major revenues semi-annually, one in June, one in December. So, just because you may have an ending cash balance, it's $3+ million. If you have a large project that's coming out, let's say in April or May, you could put yourself in a situation where you go negative. Obviously, Vincennes is not in that circumstance, but others are. So this is just a good way to track cash flows and how things work out. And then moving forward into 2022, we have our projections built in there. Really, we just take your total projections and divide them by 12. We can get more sophisticated with that later, I suppose. This is how we have it broken up right now. Page 6, again, this is your Fund 311, Hart Street Allocation Fund. We just talked a little bit about how that works in terms of revenue projections. TIF revenue collections, $1.6 million this year. Started the year with $3.7 million. If we go all the way down to the bottom, we're projecting $2.7 and change for about $500,000, $600,000 spend down in cash, and a year-ending fund balance of $3.1 million. Going forward to next year, Main Street Phase 3, Main Street Phase 2, it's the lion's share of spending going into next year. We've got a big spend down in cash for that reason. So we banked cash over a period of time, and there's going to be a spend down next year. So it's been planned for and allocated here in the plan. And obviously, too, some folks find it helpful to supplement this page with a more long-term projection with less details. So some places might want to see, if we expire in 2026, what's those other years look like if we just look at it from a beginning cash, revenue, expenditure, ending cash perspective to see, bonds are falling off or these projects are falling off. How much runway do we really have here as we get out to the next few years? How do we plan for that? Some folks find that useful, and that's super easy to add as well if we wanted to do that. Moving on to page 7, this is the Hart Street Allocation Fund, 5-year projection. Actually, got ahead of myself there. We're already providing that. So, sorry about that. So we're actually already doing that. So,
There it shows the total revenue that falls off.
that's exactly, that's exactly what I was talking about, is this slide right here.
And
I think this is,
the math to create the percentage. So.
I think this is really slick information to have, especially since, the expiration's coming in the next 4 to 5 years. Knowing what's available and what's remaining, that's perfect. So. Let's see, the Bond Capital Projects Fund. So we're tracking your bond funds as well. Not much to go over there. It's just showing, bond proceeds, capital outlays, cash balances, things like that. That one's pretty well closed out. So financials. So this is the contracts page. As you guys are aware, we like to track your contracts. So again, if you have a professional services contract, this top line there, $435,000. We want to track how much you've spent to date on that to make sure you're not going over or under. So it's a great page just to refer to. See how much more you have on these contracts, and we got the same information down below on just a graphical representation of those contracts and how much we have left on paying on those. And then finally, I believe the last page is the debt overviews. So again, this is just a component of your reporting requirements, just putting in what kind of debt information there is, your debt funds, how much is coming in, how much is going out, what the balances are, et cetera. So that's all I have on the financial update. If you have any questions.
Thank you, Gary.
Yes, sir.
You wanna just stand by a second?
Sure, yeah.
Is there a motion to approve the financial report?
I'll make a motion, we approve the financial report as presented.
I'll second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same. Motion carries. You wanna go ahead and do the
Sure, yeah.
report?
Yeah, sure. So, do you guys have the impact in front of you as well, or do you need that still? Okay, I have copies of that for you as well. It's also the same thing. I can put them on here. So again, we provide a lot of services for the Redevelopment Commission, one of which is, kind of keeping tabs on all the reporting requirements, statutory changes, requirements at the state level. One of the changes that came out a couple of years ago, and I believe last year or the year before may have been our first time doing this, was an annual TIF impact presentation. So the new rule was on an annual basis, every Redevelopment Commission would have a requirement that they would hold a public meeting. They would send out notices 10 days prior. And we would simply put together something that would discuss TIF impact on all the overlapping taxing units. So any taxing units that levy a tax within any of your allocation areas, we would determine could possibly have a TIF impact. So let me see if I can do this a little better here. So we have a little bit of education here. I can just fly through this a little bit. I know most of you are familiar with that. But the first thing we wanted to define was just some definitions. Economic development area. We want to think geographically. There's two different things you could consider when thinking about a redevelopment commission. There's your economic development area, and typically that's a larger geographical area, geographical boundary, in which you would actually use and spend proceeds of TIF dollars. And then there's an allocation area itself, and that's the parcels that we outline where we're going to be capturing value that would generate TIF revenue or TIF increment. And then we have just a definition of tax increment finance there at the bottom. Let's see. Get down here. There we go. Reasons you want to create a TIF district, you guys are all familiar with that, capital investments, attracting new residents, et cetera, et cetera. This is a good graph. There's a little chart there, colorful chart that goes over how TIF works. We go over this time and time again. But essentially you have your base assessed value. Whenever we adopt a declaratory resolution, the base assessment, whatever the assessed value of those properties are, say it's a particular property, whatever the assessed value of that property is frozen in time, and that we encompass that within an allocation area. That AV, the taxes on that property, continue going to the city, the school, the county, all the overlapping taxing units. If we incentivize development and there's an increase in assessed value on that property as a result of incentive that we've offered, that has to do with new construction, abatement roll-off, destruction and appeals also affect that. Those are ways that we can capture assessed value growth in the terms of TIF revenue, TIF increment. We do that for a period of time over the course of 25 years from the date of debt issuance, at which time all that AV that we've captured over the course of that 25 years would revert back to all the base units. So as we kick this conversation off with, there is an allocation area that's expiring in 2026. So in 5 years, we're going to be in that orange category there, where there's going to be assessed value that then becomes part of the base assessed value, and we'll talk about what impact that would have on the overlapping units. And we actually have that scenario broken out for today's discussion. That's exactly the point of the TIF impact. Let's see if I can go down. There we go. So again, reporting requirements, there's several. There's your annual reporting requirement, April 1st and April 15th, same report. One's reported to the Redevelopment Commission, one's reported to the fiscal and executive body. Your June 15th, your excess incremental pass-through, that's the little percentage calculation we put on your plan. It's just us calculating what that is. We report on that annually. April 1st, neutralization. So as we were talking earlier about how we capture assessed value on new construction or demolition, et cetera. We do that through the annual TIF neutralization process, so that's been completed for 2022. And then finally, what we're talking about today, the December 31st annually presentation to overlapping taxing units. So overview of the Redevelopment Commission, the Hart Street allocation area, start date 2096, expiration date 2026. There's some nuance there. Obviously, there's several dates depending on when different resolutions were signed. But in aggregate, just under 59 million total in incremental assessed value for the Hart Street allocation area. I don't know why it keeps doing that. So as part of the presentation, we're required to go over, the financials, the plans of the allocation area itself. So we went over that just a little bit earlier. Obviously, we did the financial update. This is exactly the same snapshot of the financial update we went over before. Just talks about your beginning cash balances, your revenues that you capture in 2021, along with all the capital outlays, debt payments, and other services and charges that are projected to be paid in 2021. Surplus deficit pass-through calculation and your unique fund balance. We've gone over that already. It's just in here to meet the reporting requirement. The other thing we have to discuss is long-term plans for the allocation area itself. Obviously, Main Street Phase 2 and 3, we talked about that for 2022. That's where a lion's share of this revenue is going, and we would determine that to be the long-term plans, the allocation area itself. So when talking about impact, and I'm gonna try to stay out of the weeds as much as possible, but again, when we capture assessed value within a TIF allocation area, we have to quantify what the impact of that actually is to the overlapping taxing units. If we were to accept the premise again that this is a new project that we incentivize and they only came to Vincennes because of the incentive we offered, obviously the impact would be zero because the AV wouldn't have existed otherwise. So they call that the but-for test. What this tells us to do is kind of ignore the but-for test and just say, pass through the AV, what would happen? If we pass through the AV, what would happen? Well, by and large, here in Indiana, a lot of folks tend to think that, as Mr. McNeese alluded to earlier, that it's dollar for dollar. If the TIFs bring it in $1 million, for instance, in TIF revenue, and we release all the assessed value to the overlapping units, then that $1 million would be allocated towards all the overlapping units, the school, the city, and it would be a dollar for dollar impact. That's not the case. Here in Indiana, levies are fixed. So what a release in assessed value actually does is marginally tiny drives down tax rates. And if you're in a high circuit breaker environment, all that really does is lower the amount of circuit breaker loss you have. So for the city of Vincennes or here in Knox County, the higher the circuit breaker you have, the more you're impacted by TIFs. So Knox County with a 16.32% overall circuit breaker loss, you can kind of see where they stack up in the state. I think the best fit, or the average line would be right around here. So Knox County is obviously above average. For that reason, TIF in this part of the state is a little bit more impactful than it is other places. But again, got ahead of myself there. There we go. So other places have absolutely zero impact. You go down to the 0% line. There's communities that we work with that have absolutely zero impact. Their TIFs collecting millions of dollars. There's no impact to the overlapping units. If you have a high circuit breaker, then the overlapping units would collect more of their levy. They would have less circuit breaker loss, and that's where your impact is generated. So that's what we're talking about here today is what is that circuit breaker impact? And hypothetically, if TIF did not grow and in 2026 that 40 million or whatever were released, what would the impact be? What kind of additional revenue would we see the overlapping units collecting? So here's the TIF impact chart. So this shows you what would actually happen in this circumstance. So the total impact on the overlapping units would be just over 1.3 million. 2022 TIF revenue collections are projected to be 1.7 million and change. So that's what I mean. Every circumstance in the state, it doesn't matter where you are. In terms of generating additional dollars, AV is most efficient within an allocation area just in terms of generating dollars. We call that a TIF margin. That's a phrase we've coined. You generate 22% more revenue with that AV being within a TIF allocation area than you do if it were just because of the levy controls. It's exactly because of the levy controls. If you had no circuit breaker at all, you would generate 100% more revenue. The higher circuit breaker you have, the lower the TIF margin is. So that's how that works. The illustration at the top, the overlapping units, the circuit breaker impact, and the percentage of the total impact, That's really based on rate, allocated based on tax rate. Obviously, the city is going to be the highest tax rate of all tax rates you would see on your tax bill, or folks within the allocation area would see on their tax bill. So Vincennes represents a lion's share of that 1.3 million of impact. They're absorbing just under $1 million at 928,000. That's almost 69% of the impact. Going down the list, the Vincennes Community School Corporation, 329, 25% roughly of the impact, and then so on and so forth. Knox County, 61,000, less than 5%. Public Library, and the remainder are hardly anything at all. And then to put that in perspective, what does that mean in terms of their annual budget? So we have their annual budget listed out to the side there for the city, for the school. So even though the city, for instance, has a $928,000 impact, that's 6.65% of their 2021 budget. Obviously, the city's collecting $1.7 million in terms of TIF dollars as well. So obviously, it's a positive, a net positive. The Vincennes Community School Corporation coming in second, $329,000 circuit breaker impact, representing 1% of their budget. So very, very small there in terms of overall scope of their annual budget. And then you can see the percentages as we get on the list for the other overlapping units, the fire, the townships, the solid waste, very, very negligible. So that's the impact. So again, if we get to 2026, I know not all of the AVs pass through, 44 million of it's going to be passed through. But this is how we would look at that calculation. We would look at it from that. That's what the overlapping units could anticipate in terms of additional dollars that they could collect. There are other ways. We've not seen a lot of TIFs expire in the state just because there was an old legacy statute, which this Vincennes falls under, where they didn't have an expiration. And then I believe it was 2015, they said in 10 years, all the legacy allocations or areas are expiring. So you're seeing that 2025, 2026 expiration for some of those older ones. So we're starting to see some of these old legacy TIFs expire. So it'll be interesting to see how all this shakes out, because we've not really seen any of them actually expire, because all the old ones that are expiring, again, were under those old statutes. There are opportunities to capture some of that as well to soften the blow, because obviously this is how the city's putting together the redevelopment commission, or their economic development efforts. So those are things that we'll talk about when we get closer to that time. That's all I had on the impact. I think there's one final page which just defines TIF impact again, but I think we talked about that enough already. So if you guys have any specific questions, I'd be happy to go through any slide or anything in detail.
Any questions for Gary? Gary, thank you. Do you want to go ahead and talk just briefly about the
Sure.
process of residential TIF establishment?
Absolutely. So I've got this timeline that so Ice Miller put this together. I can throw it up here as well. I don't think you guys have this, but I'll just toss it up here. It's not it's a hacked together timeline with all the dates taken out of it. All right, let's try this one more time. See if we can get it over there. There we go. I apologize for not bringing copies of this. But it's a timeline that Ice Miller's put together. So the first thing we wanted to do, what we're talking about is the housing program, right? So if we wanted to look at putting together the ability for the Vincennes Redevelopment Commission to capture 1% properties under a new statute that came out, I believe, a year or so ago.
Do we
Yes,
have
sir.
a copy of this? or-
I believe I have
mean,
two
I
copies.
think it's
I think I have
important
two
Copies of it, yeah.
Well, I know it's not on that projector, but it's very important that we see this.
I've got one there. It's going to make a few more
Okay,
copies. as well.
okay.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, since it's not.
I can just hang tight until he gets the copies made if that works, because
Well, actually, let's stop and go ahead and do
Sure.
Main Street Phase 2
Yeah.
and 3 updates. And then we'll
works
get
for
back.
me.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So Main Street Phase 2, you'll see in your claims, we've got a large chunk of our right-of-way payout purchasing. I think we're only waiting on 3, maybe 4 parcels left. So a lot of good progress in the last month with our right-of-way for Main Street Phase 2. We have moved the letting date to April of 2022, which that's just paperwork. We're still going to construction in the spring. We anticipate right-of-way being clear possibly as early as mid next month. Once that happens, then utilities can get started and our clearing contract can get going. Main Street Phase 3, we had some lighting meetings this week. A little bit different section through there. Wanted to tweak our design a little bit, so we've been hashing that out this week. Right of way is much less involved. All of the residents on the south side of the road are temporary right of ways. There's no permanent acquisitions from any of those, so we only have 3 parcels involved, 2 from the school and 1 from the Catholic Diocese. So right of way is going to be much less involved for that section. So that's my update for phase 2 and phase 3. Any questions?
Thank you, JP.
I did have one more request. I'm working on a striping package throughout like the entire city of Vincennes. There's a lot of hot spots we need to hit that the street department has struggled getting yellow paint. They can't get it. It's basically being rationed by manufacturers and distributors. So we get like a 5-gallon pail a month, which doesn't do much of anything. So I'm putting together a contract, and also some of these larger sections the street department struggles to do with their manpower. It's much more efficient and cost effective to use a subcontractor. So I'm putting together a bid package, and one of the larger sections I wanted to include was Hart Street, and I wanted to see if the RDC would be entertaining funding that section of striping for Hart Street. We'll be doing paint, not thermo, so it'll be a lot cheaper, because hopefully we can repave it in the next 2 to 3 years.
That was my question, is when is the payment to repave it, mill and repave?
Right.
That's what's gonna happen. And how deep? I mean, is it 2-inch mill or is it a 4-inch mill? Or?
We'll do inch and a half down, inch and a half back up.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're certainly willing to look at it, just bring us the numbers.
Okay.
Do you have any preliminary estimates or anything?
I think to do Hart Street from first to the end of the 4-lane would probably be less than 20,000. And that could be, it could be less than 10. I just, if you want to hold me to a number, I would probably guess less than 20.
So in those, let's talk about Hart Street repaving. In 2 years, are we coming to this board, or are we going somewhere else to look at funding for Hart Street?
I think it'll be here. Yeah. And I think, isn't that already in the projections or not? Repaving Hart Street, we already have that placeholder in there?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
That was a sidewalk.
I don't think the repaving.
No, the repaving's not. The
Oh,
sidewalk.
that was a sidewalk,
We've talked
that's
about
right.
it. I mean, we know it's
We've
coming,
talked
but
about this for
it's not
a
in
few
there.
years.
I think it's $500,000. Well, that's
the base
without
cost.
50/50, so it could be 250.
It's not in there.
It's not.
Okay.
The sidewalks are in there at 500,000, I think.
Yeah.
I was thinking it would be buried,
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, not worried about it. Hey, JP, on Hart Street again, are there additional stuff when we look at repaving that? We've had some issues with the lights at, say, Veterans and Hart Street. Are those things in that as well when you're gonna repave that, put any new loops in or any of that kind of stuff like that?
Yeah, loop detectors can be included. I think those are eligible items since we're disrupting those when we pave, so those will definitely be redone. And then when we put it back, I'll put thermo down, and that'll last several years. And I even think we'll look at Kimmel also. There's a section of Kimmel there from Ford to Hart that's in about the same
And
age.
I know not in the same thing, but during that process, right there on Hart Street, there's, as you go into Memring Plaza there, that wall looks like it's giving way a little bit in
Mhm.
there. Would we look at, we could do all that at the same time while there's a disruption in there, maybe?
We've looked at the wall, and our plan for the wall is to remove it and put in a fill slope. I think there was, at the time of the construction, that there was a property line with NDOT, and there was some discrepancies there, so they put the wall because the fill slope would have breached the property line. I think we've talked to NDOT about it, and they don't care, so I think our plan is just to remove the wall. I don't know that that's a CCMG eligible item, but we can look at it at that time.
JP, is there some issues with manholes on Hart Street? I noticed some plating on a couple of them. Is that?
So, the Kirk, he may be able to answer it a little bit better than I can. The water department has kind of changed how they fix those manhole lids. Coordinating with my department, we have basically cut out 4x4 instead of just throwing cold patch and cold patch. They now cut a 4x4 hole, they adjust the manhole and backfill with concrete and broom finish it. Makes it really nice and smooth, lasts a lot longer than just patching in circles. So I think when they have an issue with a manhole, that's what they do now is they go out, adjust it, and I think that's all that's happened. There were 2 repairs done this week. There was one right in front of Tractor Supply, and then one at 15th and a half in Hart.
That one in Tractor Supply was rattling pretty bad every time I went over it.
Right. So probably had a cracked frame, and to fix it, that's their new policy and procedure now. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, JP. Okay, Gary, we got our papers.
So again, sorry about that. So as far as timeline goes, when this whole thing starts, the very first thing we have to do is confirm the city's eligible for the housing program under the statute. So one of the things we do is, and that's the first item there that's check done, is filing a form with the DLGF with the tentative calculations. There's some calculation hurdles we have to overcome, and it's I believe it's the average of new housing starts can't exceed the average 3 previous years total time, I believe is what it is. It's a calculation that we ran. Regardless, the city qualified for the housing program. So tentatively approved by the DLGF. The last thing we want to do is not do our homework on that, go through the entire process, do the application, and then get denied. So we have to clear that hurdle first. Even if we didn't clear that hurdle, there are still ways to capture 1%. So it's not a huge deal. It would just adjust our approach a little bit in terms of the approval process. So this is a timeline that Ice Miller has put together. The first step would be the voluntary annexation component of the parcels that are outside, because obviously before we establish a allocation area and make it into a housing program, it has to be in the city. So there was some, I believe the ordinance that was put into place, and that would take effect on the 1st of 2022. Once that starts, that allows us to really hit the ground running with the process. So it is the standard 4-step process with some additions. So just reading down the list, there is a 30-day notice on public hearing to the fiscal officers, to the affected taxing units, superintendents on governing boards, presidents, school corporations located in the proposed allocation area. That's a new step. That's not involved in your 4-step process. Public hearing goes to the newspaper, notice of public meeting published, tells you where to publish it at, preliminary housing program provided to the township assessor with notice of the meeting. There'll be 2 public meetings on the affected neighborhoods that would be around to obtain the views of the neighborhood associations and residents. Redevelopment Commission adopts the closure resolution. So all these steps before that red point there are all extra things that we do outside of creating a normal allocation area, just some procedural items that we would put together. And then after the declaratory resolution, there's a school board meeting to consider the resolution that approves the housing program that we would go through. Going down to the next page, the Plan Commission adopts the declaratory resolution, so that's a part of the normal process there. That's not an extra step. Resolution delivered to Common Council for agenda. Common Council adopts resolution approving the Plan Commission order and housing program. Part of that's part of your regular process. The housing program separate, but the council approval of a new area is always required regardless. Finally, there's a public hearing notice on the declaratory resolution, and then that goes to you have to be properly noticed. There'll be a redevelopment commission meeting on the public hearing to adopt the declaratory resolution. All that's the exact same in any other circumstance when you're creating the allocation area. You have your 4-step process: declaratory, Plan Commission, council, 10-day notice for public hearing, confirmatory resolution with Redevelopment Commission. That's very standard. And then Common Council adopts resolution approving creation of new housing tax allocation area. Confirmatory resolution recorded, and all those steps are normal. So that's the process in a nutshell, really. It's a lot of legal steps, resolutions that are prepared, but there are special meetings. I think the most notable difference is those the special meeting with, you know, the school board signs off, and then you also have the special meeting with the affected neighborhoods and HOAs. Really, that's the only difference between.
Two public, it actually hold two public.
Yeah, two
meetings.
public meetings, right. Yep. So those are the only things that are different than your regular four-step process, or those extra
I
steps.
just have a question. The TIF residential districts, you know, designated as such, will that all be done all in one fell swoop? One, you know, that,
That's our hope.
yeah, that they will be identified, and then it will all be done in one fell swoop. So, you know, we go through this process one time.
That's the plan.
I mean, that's the plan.
I would just
Yes, sir.
comment that since at our last meeting, we voted to start the process, that obviously hit the media sources, and since then, we've had a couple people call wanting some areas looked at, and also some potential more voluntary annexation. And so we've kind of had to slow down just a bit because, and at some point, we're just gonna have to do it. But if we, with these things on the horizon, we don't wanna pay twice to do it. So we gotta kind of slow down, although I think hopefully within the not too distant future, we'll be ready for the declaratory resolution, so we can get the ball started. But with the last voluntary annexation, that takes about
Right.
4 or 5 months, doesn't it?
Takes a while.
If that happens, say January, it won't take effect till the next January, right? Taxing year, or the,
Yeah, so if we declare this area in, you know, let's say March, for instance, as long as it's done before December 31st, it always looks back to that prior 1/1/1. So any declaratory resolution adopted in 2022 would look back to 1/1/2022 as the assessment year. So if it's just, you know, if it's zoned agricultural, and there's, you know, it's just zoned as ag, and that's the only value there is ag, and then it's annexed into the city, we change zoning, and then we break ground, you know, we still get that when it's zoned as ag and when there's nothing there, because as of January, there was nothing there. So the first year it's confusing, obviously. Indiana, we're a year in arrears, so it's 2022, pay 2023 is technically year zero. And you wouldn't actually lose out on anything if there were any progress done, so,
But
yes.
if that property that may come into the city comes in, say, in March of 2022, it doesn't actually become part of the city until January of 2023?
could they make it a housing tip as soon as it's annexed? Or
Yes.
does it have to-
Okay, that,
Yeah. I talked to Heather, I mean, about that, and I said, what's the holdup on the annexation component, us moving forward? And she said, it has to be in the city. And I said, well, when's it gonna be in the city? And she said, the end of this year. Beginning of 2022, it's in the city, and then we start the process. So
but
that,
we're
we're
talking
just,
about another
We're
parcel.
talking about.
so we're talking about a different parcel. Okay, I'm sorry.
So if it comes in, if this new parcel comes in March of 2022, can it be included in a housing TIF ordinance that's gonna start?
I think there's more nuance than that, because I think the issue with, if I'm not mistaken, the issue with the parcel that we're talking about, the first one, was that it was in a fire territory, which has
Restricted fire district.
specific rules. That would be as well. So my assumption would be that it would be, I don't know the answer to that question, but my assumption would be
I
that
think we
it
worked
would be
through
delayed.
that
Yeah,
with Ice Miller, with the date of the.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question.
Well, what we gotta figure out is if that parcel comes in March or April, however long it takes to do, can we include that immediately in the TIF, or does we have to wait to do that parcel until January of 2023?
It has to be in the city before we can do anything with the TIF.
So
'Cause the
we might
city
as well
doesn't have
go ahead, 'cause
jurisdiction.
We can't just keep, in my
Yeah.
opinion, we can't just keep putting it off and putting it
No,
off.
because if it's not gonna get in there, then.
The
Right.
area we just annexed was voluntary. It won't actually be in the city for the first of the year, right?
Based on, yeah.
So that's what we're saying. The new voluntary wouldn't actually be part of the city until 23.
Would be my assumption. I'll call Heather about that. Yeah.
So if that's the case, we just gotta move ahead and then come back and tie that up, otherwise we'll just be doing this forever.
Yeah.
Gary, just a quick question. If the I understand this with the city and the volunteer annexation. If a county wanted to do, a housing TIF, they have to meet the same hurdles, when it comes to the amount of houses being built in a certain area at a certain period of time, income stuff, all that? Is it all, those are all the same thing for a city and a county?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so I have a pretty clear picture of where we are, I think. So we're probably gonna need to go ahead and start moving, and we'll have to bring that other parcel in once it gets in the city. So I think we're ready then to start.
Okay.
Start this process now instead of waiting, and then we'll just have to come back again.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay? Any other questions for Gary about that?
I'll follow up with ICE as well on that question, and I'll send an email to the group later today.
Obviously, we'd like to do it all together.
If we
but-
can, yeah, that would be ideal, but
Right.
yeah, I'm just not sure, so.
Okay, thank you very much. Any new business? Approval of claims in the amount of $476,260, $476,265.80.
I'll make that motion. We approve in the amount of $476,265.80.
I'll second.
A motion and a second, any discussion?
So just for the notes, as JP stated, the reason why this is much higher is this is a right-of-way purchase for the Main Street project, so you'll see a number of those. That's why this is an unusually high claims docket.
And that's all reimbursable in 80/20.
Okay.
Other questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same. Motion carries. RDC member miscellaneous. Cheryl, our next meeting is,
That will fall on Thursday, December 16th at 9 a.m.
thank you. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? All in favor? Aye, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next month, I guess.
This is interesting information.
Jerry Memmering, welcome back to the RDC. It has been that long, hasn't it? How long were you on before then? Since it started? 95. Yeah, 15 years. You and Brad Dale, I think, from the beginning.